So you moved out of there. He's moving in there. He's moving to your whole house, buddy.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 134, and it is that wonderful time of year again, Ben, when hunters are going to be flocking to the woods, and things will be getting a little more interesting for those of us that venture into the woods, perhaps not to do the hunting thing, but for the camping and stuff, and the bushcrafting and whatnot. Maybe the hunting. It's hard to say. But this time of year does bring a few unique challenges and some considerations. Would you not say so?
It definitely does. There's, especially for people who aren't hunters, it brings some trepidation. I'm sorry, I'm not going to hit the right word. But people get nervous. They get nervous because they're worried about getting shot at, uncomfortable confrontations. And it's just, and I don't blame it on anyone. It's just one of those things. Like, a lot of people's sport this time of year, and they're getting out there, and they don't really want somebody tramping through their hunting area and preventing them from being able to hunt and scaring away the animals. And on the flip side, it is some of the most beautiful times of the year to be out there.
Well, I was going to say, my thing is, and I hunt, and you hunt, or you have hunted in the past anyway, Ben, but this is the best time of year, honestly, for me to be out in the woods and doing stuff, because it's cool enough at night that you can, like, honestly, snuggle into your sleeping bag and get a great night's sleep. It's cool enough that during the day you can, do stuff around the campsite area and not sweat to death. Like, you're fairly comfortable. So, it is one of those weird situations where, yeah, you have to be respectful and understanding of hunters and stuff like that, but I don't think you have to completely avoid the woods. I think you just need to, like I said, do some considerations. And that's kind of something I want to touch on here tonight. I'm not sure what your views on the matter are tonight and what you wanted to cover, but that's one of the things I wanted to cover off on was some of the things you can do to hopefully alleviate the tension around hunters, if there is any, because there are some great hunters out there that are woodsy people, and they completely understand. Like, don't get me wrong. We're not saying all hunters are bad. As I said, Ben hunts, I hunt. It's just, you can do things that might make it easier for everybody all the way around. Is that safe to say?
Yes, for sure. There's quite a few things you can do. There's the obvious things. Wear orange so you're easily visible, and that's just, for everyone's safety.
And I mean, this is what I wear when I go into the woods right now, and it's funny enough you mentioned that because I had it sit beside me. It's just an orange flagging vest. I used to wear this with Natural Resources. It's got a ton of pockets in it. That's why it's a flagging vest. But that's really all you need to stick out. You don't have to go out and buy a big fancy coat and pants and hat and stuff like that. If you want to, by all means. But a nice simple vest makes you visible.
There's also quite a few areas that are great for exploring that aren't open for hunting, but are open. So some of the wilderness areas are not open for hunting. I believe some are, some maybes, and a lot of crown land definitely is. Mm-hmm. I think wilderness areas themselves are generally. How does that work? Do you know?
So some wilderness areas have a short season, and it's generally just bow hunting, or there's special restrictions involved on them. And if anybody's interested in that, you can actually find it out. Here in Nova Scotia, you go to the Department of, it's not Lands and Forestry anymore, I think it's Department of Natural Resources again, website, which is just novascotia.ca/NATR/hunt. And it'll bring you into all the information that you could ever want to know about hunting. But I mean, like the Liscombe Game Sanctuary, I believe, has a 2-week period where you're allowed to hunt in there with a bow or something like that, or you used to in the past. I'm a little rusty on these myself because I haven't worked for them in a while. But at most, these places generally have special circumstances for going in there. And they're short seasons, and then after that, hunters should not be in there. I would still suggest wearing orange, because they're not supposed to be in there isn't an automatic guarantee they're not in there.
Well, I mean, there is always that too. I mean, not everyone follows the rules, and those people are generally not what I would consider a hunter. They're a poacher. They're not following the rules, and they may not, there's also a few times in the year where Sunday hunting is allowed now, but it's only a few.
Usually it's the first 2 Sundays of rifle season.
Yeah. Which was something that a lot of hunters pushed for years, and the reason for it was if you're working, Monday to Friday, you only get really one day to hunt. So now Sunday gives them that ability. And I've had long conversations with hunters about that and saying, like, I was at the time very pro no hunting on Sundays because it gave anyone who wanted to just get out and enjoy. One day they felt relatively safe. And I think they found a good compromise there. I really do. I'm not complaining in the least with that. But it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah, most definitely for the first 2 seasons. And if anybody's wondering, rifle season for deer, I believe it's the last Friday in October is when it starts, and it runs to sometime in December. Bow season I'm a little bit more familiar with. That's the type of hunting I enjoy. Bow season's actually been running for 2 weeks now, I believe. Crossbow has just opened up, I believe. So you'll be getting that in the woods along with muzzle loaders. And muzzle loaders nowadays, honestly, are getting up there on snuff with some rifles, honestly. That the only disadvantage is they're a little slower to reload. But other than that, I mean, some of them shoot pretty accurate, pretty far.
Wow. Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm told even like the loading is not so bad. Like it's not like it was years ago. You had like a measured out. Like everything's kind of pre-done and a nice little package they can slide right in there. So it's not that much different than a regular bullet anymore. But it is. Just be aware of it and all that. The other thing is most hunters, and this is my experience, usually aren't that far from their vehicle.
And that's fair. I could say that as well.
Yeah, if you're driving down a dirt road, you're trying to find a spot to go. If you see a vehicle and it's hunting season, there's a relatively good chance that there's a hunter there, and just avoid that general area. You can just go a little further, stop a little earlier and go somewhere else. Just be aware that they're probably within a few hundred yards of their vehicle. I mean, it's a pretty common thing. Some people do go further, but the majority of people I've met have been within a reasonable distance of the vehicle. And that's just the thing. Like, a lot of guys don't want to be dragging an animal for miles through the woods. So that's how they do it.
Another thing to keep in mind, and I've run into this sometimes, I'm not going to say problem, but this thing to be aware of is if it's still relatively warm, probably not so many hunters in the woods, just because if you do harvest an animal or something like that, you do got to get out of the woods and process and all that good stuff before it heats up and starts to, bacteria and stuff starts to grow. So not everyone, but a good majority won't even hunt unless it's a cooler day.
Yeah, it's definitely preferable to get an animal on a nice cool day. And the other thing, just throwing things out there, cool day, and most hunters are most active earlier in the morning and later in the evening. Like, definitely after sun up and before sundown, but that's when animals are actually the most active. In the middle of the day, most animals are pretty sedentary. They're not moving around that much, and most hunters actually take a break. So just be extra cautious in the hours preceding and following darkness.
Yeah, because a lot of hunters do come in before daylight just to set up in stands or around bait sites or any of that stuff if they're not stock hunters. And they're trying to be quiet. So if you're going in and you're rustling around, that might annoy a few people or ruffle some feathers. Same as if you're coming out at night. Coming out at night's not quite so bad because at that point, hopefully, these people are heading home. You know what I mean? But in the morning, it's definitely more of an interesting thing. I've been out in the woods a couple times and maybe making a little more racket than I should have. And, hear that sudden, keep it down, coming from the tree. And you're like, whoa, what the heck was that? You know what I mean? So it does take you back sometimes because, hunters by nature, they try to hide themselves. You know what I mean? So they're not going to be standing right out in the open, generally. Some will. I've met that too, walking in the woods and you just stumble upon somebody else that's just walking through the woods. But yeah, so just, I guess in general, a good idea, regardless if you hunt or not, is just to give the regulations kind of a quick glance over. That way the seasons, when sun up, sundown roughly is, because a lot of hunters, you're allowed a half hour before sun up and a half hour after sundown, I think it is.
Yeah.
And just some general awareness of that stuff, and you can kind of work yourself outside of those busy areas. You know what I mean?
Um, yeah, so there's like some good highlights, like wear bright clothing, be aware of other people that are around, usually vehicles. Some guys will well mark an area around their hunting area. Not
Yeah.
all. That's kind of a hit or miss. I don't even have a guess of what the percentage is, but I know some guys do try to make sure that people are aware, other hunters are aware of where they're to, and just anyone from casually walking in. So some of them will flag off a bit of an area. I've seen that a few times. And I've heard the stories of two guys hunting the same field and not being aware of each other, and just accidentally finding it where one guy's on one end and one guy's on the other end, and it was only when they're coming out around the same time that they realized that they're hunting the same opening or field or area. So because they both come in probably similar times from a different direction, and they're just being pretty quiet themselves. So they're not always fully aware of everything that's around them. But, it's good to be aware of that, because if you don't know where someone else is, there's risks there for sure.
And you made a good point there too. Most hunters will frequent open areas because if you are hunting with a rifle or something like that, you need to be able to get a shot. So in open areas, trails, things like that, that's where you're going to see the most activity. So us as bushcrafters, the benefit we have is we can basically waltz in anywhere and set up shop. You know what I mean? So a thicker area, maybe not as ideal, is still very viable to go in and do your thing and not really bother anyone.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, you're willing to walk. Generally, a bushcrafter is willing to walk a little further in. He's interested in setting up a camp in a little bit more isolated of an area. So it's really the going in and out where you're going to get the most risk of meeting up with a hunter. And by no means is this all encompassing, because a lot of bushcrafters do, and some of them will go a bit further and do that little extra bit. And some hunters, they have a favorite spot that might be a little out of the way, and they may enjoy the camping. So there's that crossover group. So it's good to just be aware and keep an eye out and take your time. But there's no reason to say you can't do bushcrafting in the hunting season. In fact, it's still, like we said from the very beginning, it's some of the best time of year. It's cooler nights, leaves are changing, a lot of opportunities to really enjoy it. So,
well, I think the last time you and I went out the backside of the lake, that was in October, wasn't it? I think deer season was just kicking up at that point, and we had no problems at all. And the other thing is, we're just saying deer season general as a generalization here. Don't get us wrong. There's bear season that's in effect. There's a general deer hunting season that's going to be in effect shortly. There's the bow season that's in effect shortly. October 1st, I believe, starts small game season. So a lot of partridge, pheasants, and things like that. I can't remember when rabbit season starts, but that's another one that's going to come along. And that one actually runs right into February. Yeah. So, I mean, this whole, it's not just a month, 2 months. You're looking at like a couple of months here where you're going to have different hunters. But once again, it's probably the big game hunters that are going to be the most disturbed by us going into the woods and doing stuff. Generally, a rabbit hunter, they're just out there, they flush something, and they take their luck at that. Same as bird hunters. I've actually met a couple people camping while I've been out bird hunting. I love bird hunting. It's much like deer hunting. I like getting out there and seeing stuff more than actually harvesting most animals. I think I've told the story before. I've taken the bow out and forgotten the arrows and still had a great time.
Yeah.
And much the same when I go bird hunting. Sometimes I'll take the bow with small game tips on it. Sometimes I'll take the little 410. More often than not, I'll forget the ammo for whichever one. But I still get out. I take a day pack, small cook kit, and you go out and you have it. It's like a day adventure. It's just a purpose to get out there. It's another excuse, honestly, to get out there and have a little fun.
Yeah. And I feel like for me, when I did small game, and I do enjoy small game, it's a very fun activity. I assume a lot of people snare here too, right? Not everyone's even necessarily carrying a gun for all of it, but it is definitely not as much. Like they're walking, they're much closer to a bushcraft situation for that, where the deer and even like duck and geese, a lot of guys are set up in blinds, they're hiding, and they have an area that they're hunting at, and they stay pretty stationary, whereas small game hunters tend to be moving.
No, and that's a very good point. And that's something to keep in mind too when you're picking your area that you're going to bed down for the night, or where you're looking to go bushcrafting for a few days and stuff. Is it along a pond or shoreline or something like that where there's potentially a lot of ducks and geese coming in? One, it's probably not as likely you're going to be bothering the hunters, but they're probably going to be bothering you as soon as day cracks and you start hearing shotgun blasts go off. Yeah. So, I mean, this works both ways. We have to be respectful of the hunters out there, but at the same time, it's good to know where you're at. I don't know. Have you ever been duck hunting, Ben? Like, where there's a lot of people duck hunting, open fields and stuff like that?
Not a lot of people, but I have been out, yes.
Have you ever gotten sprinkled? Where you're like, there's people all around you, and all of a sudden you'll hear shots go off, and then you hear the pellets start falling around you?
No.
Yeah, that's an eerie feeling. It's only happened once to me, and it's been in like not in this province, and it was a kind of a crowded situation where everybody kind of hits this one spot, and they're being safe. They're not like shooting at each other, but the problem is what goes up must eventually come down, right? That's the whole thing when you're shooting at game. You have to be aware of that, and sometimes people forget that aspect of it, and you get sprinkled, and it's or showered or whatever you want to call it, and all of a sudden you got these pellets falling down around you. Be aware. Hopefully they're not shooting directly at you. These things are falling, but it's still a very eerie feeling. And if you're like laid out in a hammock maybe with your tarp out, and all of a sudden you hear these shotgun blasts and you start getting sprinkled on, it's going to be a very, I don't want to say traumatizing time, but it's going to be a very eye-opening time for you. You probably won't be as sleepy as you were prior to it happening, for sure. But it's something to be aware of.
Well, me and a buddy, we were out one time. I think I've told the story before, but I'll bring it up here. And it's not hunting, but it's a similar idea. We were out camping. We were camping in some of the old Bowater area, just past Halifax, towards Bridgewater, but just there by Tantallon area, I guess, and between Tantallon and Chester, I guess. And we were in that area, and we're camping away, and we did a few lakes and stuff, and we woke up one morning, and we heard these people running around, and like they were shouting and screaming, and we heard these pop 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 pops, and they were playing airsoft, what they were doing. And I guess what they had been doing, they had this was a somewhat regular occurrence, and we've seen evidence of it while we were setting up camp, is they would attack the island that we were camping on. And they had no idea that we were there. And so when we wake up, we're hidden in like a natural lean-to shelter. All we hear is these pop, 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 pops and people screaming and stuff. And my buddy had some small flashbang style fireworks, and he fired them off in the general area, like above our heads and just sort of between us and them. And you could hear them. There's someone out there, and they're screaming and yelling, and they start running back off the island because they have no idea what's going on now. They know
they got some excitement that day.
They have plastic rounds, and somebody's firing with something a little heavier hitting. And anyways, they all kind of back off, and you can hear them talking. And this island, I think, is owned or operated by the Scouts, and that's my buddy was with the Scouts, and he said like they've never been given permission to be out there and all that. So we get up in the morning, we're finally up, and we get in the canoe, and we decide to do like a full circle around the island, and you can see them all standing in the woods looking at us. We're just waving away.
But I mean, you can get into some interesting situations, you know what I mean?
But it's a good idea to also, like, if you're camping, just as I think it's a good idea for hunters to kind of identify the area they're hunting in, is just identify where you're camping. So if there's a clearing at the edge, or if you're on a river, put a couple of pieces of tape up, and you can even mark on it what you're doing. So if anyone walks up to it, they see it, they may look at it, especially if they see writing. You can say campsite, south of here, whatever. It might give them an idea that, oh, I'm hunting, but there are people in the area. But if you do this, pick it up when you're finished. Like, don't leave it there, because otherwise it's boy who cries wolf. They'll see it a few times and never find a campsite, and they'll be like, you know.
And I hear what people are going to say right now, but Ben, there's biodegradable flagging tape.
Yeah, bullshit. I mean,
okay, you pick up what I'm laying down. I've tried this biodegradable flagging tape, and it might break down faster than regular flagging tape, but it can't be by a whole bunch more.
No, and it's not nearly as visible. So we have it with search and rescue. We've tried it, and honestly, it's not as reflective. It's not as visible as the regular flagging tape. So it doesn't degrade as quick as you'd think it would, and it isn't as visible as you like. So I think you're kind of at a lose-lose. And if you're putting markings up, you should put them up for only when you need them. So if somebody comes along, I've said this before, especially if you're going off trail, just put your name and your date on it. So if someone comes up and says, well, it's today's date or it's yesterday's date, they may still be in the area. But if it says a date that's a week old, most people are going to say, well, they're gone. Like, they're not here anymore. There's no way they're still here, right?
Well, I mean, potentially with us, we might still be there. But at that point, and good point, if you're going to be an extended period of time, take the time to walk back and update that kind of information. You know what I mean? Like, if you're expecting to stay 7 days, put today's date, expected leave time of whatever date you're going to be going out of there, too. That way, if something does happen, people aren't looking for you or assuming that you didn't come out and collect your tape. Like, you're just in there doing your due, right? And it's just a little information. You don't have to give them your entire life history. Like, oh, yeah, my name's Robert Castongi. I'm blood type O negative, and I live right here. Come find me. No, it's just like, Robert, camping, what's today's date? September 29th, dash to October 3rd. You know what I mean? Sounds like a lot of information, but if somebody comes along, it tells them exactly what you're doing, roughly about where you're at, somewhere around the flagging tape, and how long you're going to be there.
Yeah.
The downside of this is, if it is a hunter and you're in their area, they may get a little huffy, but at least now they know you're there and they can try and seek you out to, say, hey, look, I'm going to be hunting this area. Don't put antlers on and run around the woods, because it may end up bad for you.
Yeah. And if they're reasonable, and you're reasonable, I mean, it takes two, right? It takes two to fight and argue. If you find out where they're hunting and what their fire line is, where they're planning on shooting towards, you may find you're both perfectly comfortable with the plan. Like, he's going to be, 300 yards over that way, and he's shooting away from you. Okay, you're pretty safe. Like, where he is, he knows where you are, and you guys can probably do fine. And I've been in similar situations over the years where I knew where other people were and where they're hunting, and we just kind of avoided the area where we expect them to be.
And honestly, we're saying, confrontation, stuff like that, but the vast majority of people want to avoid conflict. You know what I mean? They're going to come in, even if their feathers are a little ruffled, most of those people don't want to get into an all-out fight. Even a yelling match, they don't want to. They want to come to some sort of compromise and move on with their day. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. And in the end, everyone has a right to be out there. So no one has, in legal opinion, nobody has, unless you own the land, the really right to tell you you can and cannot be there. I think there was something on one of the Bushcraft sites where somebody had put up a stand and actually said, for people to get lost, this is my stand, don't do, and it's your stand, you put it there, but the honesty is you don't own the property. It was on ground land, from my understanding. And
well, here's the thing, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not giving lawyer advice. Even a no trespassing sign doesn't mean much in Nova Scotia. We don't really have no trespassing laws on open land. Now, this does not take into account like commercial property. So farmland, agriculture land, business sites, don't go breaking into these places and say Robert sent you there and it's fine. No, sir, that's not what I'm saying. But for open land, like woods area and stuff like that, no trespassing laws in Nova Scotia are very vague to the point where they are not... If you're just passing through,
Yeah.
you can generally not get in trouble. You can't erect any kind of a permanent or semi-permanent shelter. You can't damage the land and all that good stuff, which is good bushcrafters we shouldn't be doing anyway. But if you're just passing through and somebody's like, this is my property, you're not allowed to be on here, take it with a grain of salt. Be like, okay, man, sorry, no worries, just passing through and go on about your business. You don't have to get too scared about the cops being called on you. If the conservation officers be called on you, they're going to come out and basically tell you the no trespassing laws in Nova Scotia are, I hate to say it, but feel-good laws. People put up no trespassing signs and think that, they're covered by the law when I don't want to say too much because, once again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice here. I'm recommending that you look into it if you ever get into the situation. Let's go with that from previous experience.
Well, I believe, and this is one that I've heard people say, and I think it's in the fishing book, is you cannot block access to water.
No, you can't. Not that I'm aware of, anyway. I believe you're right.
Which I had a conversation with someone a little while ago. They talked about, I have deeded access to these 3 lakes. I'm like, that's awesome, but no one can block you from a lake anyways. Like, what's the difference between you, who have a piece of property near that lake but not on the lake, you have deeded access, and me as a normal Nova Scotian resident? Like, I have just as much access to that lake, I think, as you do.
Yep, unless there's commercial land set up around it. Now, once again, if there's fish hatcheries, agriculture, stuff like that, you fall into a different set of rules and regulations. Still strongly recommend everybody goes out there and does a little research on their own. But we have right-of-way laws, which basically means nobody can own water. It's kind of like owning the moon. Nobody owns the moon. You can't own water. It's not land. So land is more or less public property. Now, there are exceptions with small ponds and stuff like that, but I'm not going to get into gray areas and splitting hairs. But let's, registered lakes and stuff like that. Registered waterways that are acknowledged. They're non-ownable except by the Crown, and technically they don't own them. They basically maintain them. It's some sort of weird terminology there. But yeah, you can't reasonably block access to these areas.
Yeah. So, but I think you can't damage anything on your way there, so you can't be ripping across them with your 4-wheeler or whatever. And if you are crossing property, my understanding is you should need to do like a beeline from where you leave the road straight to the water, more or less.
Has to be a reasonably direct route.
Yeah.
So what Steve said, deeded access may give additional rights in terms of using a vehicle rather than just pedestrian traffic. And you're right there, Steve. Deeded access will give you a little bit of freedoms there that you wouldn't have as a general civilian, for our example here. But that's not to say you can't throw your canoe on your shoulders and take a walk into this lake. If somebody tries to tell you you can't, I would be interested to see the court of law that sides with them. Not saying it can't happen. Once again, not a lawyer, not giving lawyer advice. Can't stress that enough. But historically in Nova Scotia, that is not the case.
Now, there's a few lakes that I like to visit. And most lakes do have a public access, like a couple of public ports. And that's your best bet to look for those. So one of the ones I've done a few times is Villages of Long Lake. Is on Long Lake, and part of Long Lake is part of, I think, Devil's Jaw wilderness area.
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the area, to be honest with you.
Anyways, it's about half of the lake or a third of the lake is on a wilderness area, and then the rest of it is actually owned privately. But there is a couple of private launches or private access points to that lake. And one of them is right in the middle of that community. And I've gone there a few times and launched because the road is actually quite a bit better than the one on the other section. You're much better off, in my opinion, accessing a lake like that from the public launch because you're going to get less pushback than trying to walk through someone's property when there's a public access only a few hundred feet down the road.
Now, here's an example from me from this summer, and I know we kind of started talking about lake access and got away from hunting, but it kind of loops around here. This summer, Mel and I went down to Garden of Eden. If anybody knows where that is, it's down towards Wallace through this area. And we wanted to go hit this massive lake in the boat, which is that inflatable boat we have with the motor on it and stuff like that. And anyway, we went down. We traveled past it a couple times and seen this launch. We're like, okay, we'll put it in there. But when we went down, somebody had set up a structure, like it was like a little camp there. And I was like, well, crap, I think that's the only launch that I'm aware of. So I went and I knocked on Buddy's door, and I'm like, are we allowed to use this launch, or is this a private launch? And he's like, well, it's on my property, but I can't restrict access to it because it's still technically the public access to the lake. So that's kind of, a prime example of that. He can't deny people using it. He just can't get them, ripping up his property instead. Your camera just went away there, Ben.
Sorry, I should come back on a second.
Alrighty. But anyway, yeah, so that was kind of one of those things. As a real estate lawyer specifically on this topic, I'll let you both know the deals. That'd be great, Steve. I'd actually like to know some of the legality on this. I'm drawing from my own experience when I worked with natural resources and people trying to put up these no trespassing signs and things like that. And I mean, it's a loose case. A lot of people constantly call the office like, I had no trespassing signs up, and this guy walked across the back 5 feet of my property, and blah, 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 I want to sue. And most times you're like, you can't. There's no trespassing laws. Like, if it's reasonable to cut across your property, you can't stop them. They just can't erect shelters, they can't, or any kind of permanent or semi-permanent structure, and they can't damage the areas they're going through. So you can't, like, drag your truck or ATV through, as you were saying, Ben, or cut down trees to make a trail. Like, you just have to be reasonable and respectful, and they can't really do much to you.
But, and I know it seemed like we were going off, but lakes and rivers are awesome bushcrafting areas of access, canoeing, kayaking, even just walking along them. It's quite a good spot to do. And it's also where a lot of hunters, especially fowl, bird and fowl and stuff, will be. Now, I believe if you're hunting, you have to be so many 100 meters away from any form of permanent residence.
So it depends what you're hunting with. If it's a bow or shotgun, it's one distance. If it's a rifle, it's a different distance. Yeah. Those distances can be found on the Natural Resources website, the one that I mentioned earlier, which is novascotia.ca/NATR/HUNT hunt. Look at the regulations and it'll tell you. I think it's... I know, I didn't look them up this year. I'm not even going to hazard a guess. I think it's 280 meters with a bow. I'll look them up and put them down. I'm not going to hazard a guess. I don't want to give false information here.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. We could say it today, and honestly, any day, like the government has the right to change rules, and it has to be voted on. But anything we say today may not be valid 6 months from now.
Exactly. It's always changing, and I strongly recommend people look into these regulations themselves. Once again, you don't have to be a hunter to get information out of these regulations and stuff. As somebody that just goes into the woods during these times, you should be aware of what's going on around you, or at least, have a loose idea of what's going on around you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I strongly encourage anyone who has the interest in hunting to look it up and see how they can combine that with the bushcrafting side of it, because honestly, and if Gary's listening, I didn't check to see who's listening. I know Gary does a few small game trips and stuff usually while out camping overnight and stuff. And there's plenty of other people that do. It's not a unique thing, and it's a great combination. Growing up, we did a lot of it where we would go out for rabbit hunting for a weekend and just check your sneers and stuff, and it was great fun. So, big things. Let's just rehash some of them. Mm-hmm. Make sure it's clear where you're to. Identify it. When you set up camp in hunting season, maybe don't use all camouflage gear. We've talked, the last time we talked about this, I think we said, like, even if you just hung a bright orange hat or vest near your tent or your hammock, it's a good idea. A lot of my gear is camouflage, not because I want camouflage, because that's what was available when I went to buy it.
Oh, here we go. So what they are right now for trapping, you're not allowed within 274 meters of dwelling. Traps need to be 182 meters from any other dwelling or playground. So you're looking at pretty lengthy distances there. You know what I mean? So you're like, let's round up. That way you're safe. 300 meters from any kind of dwelling, residence, playground, golf course, school, or public building. That's bear bait sites. But yeah, and I mean, that's just trapping. So as you can imagine, as you get in there with a bow or a rifle, those distances are just going to increase.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I looked them up a few years ago and just seen like how close they came to, say, my cabin. And some people say cabins don't count as much, but I have a neighbor who is there year round. Someone else said they can actually hunt from your, which I find a little fishy, but they can hunt from your doorstep if you're not there.
Yeah, I don't know about that. So the distances here is 402 meters for a rifle, 182 with a bow or crossbow. From a dwelling, playground, golf course, athletic field, woods, operation, place of business, agriculture building, or public building other than a school.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're lengthy distances. So keep that in mind as you're out there too. So the kickback to that is if somehow you manage to sneak into an area that might be within those boundaries, you shouldn't be bothered. Not that I'm encouraging that, but if you have an area where you can get into that, somebody owns some property or something like that, if you stay within a half a kilometer, 400 meters of a dwelling and residence, you're not going to have you shouldn't have many problems on there.
No, we say that, but honestly, I know of a campsite not far from where my cabin is. I think I pointed it out to you while I was out there, where people are fairly regularly camping, and it's within sight of my cabin, and it's a beautiful little spot. And I don't blame people for that. And they would be within that couple of 100 meters. Like they're probably 150 meters from the closest cabin, which is still not a bad distance. And it's a nice little spot, and it's just a corner of an old road that's not really usable anymore. So,
but there's tons of sites that are nice and close to places. I showed you one the other day, though it's probably really close. That one that's under the bridge there. Yeah. I've used it several times straight beside the river. Had a great time, and it's literally less than 150 meters from a school, maybe 200 meters from a school. Or daycare, preschool, whatever you want to say. It's up a hill and behind it, but you know what I mean. It's nice and close, still a great place to go camping. So that's another thing you could do during this time of year if you are a little nervous of hunters, because there are some people out there that are nervous of guns and hunters and people taking animals, and they want no part of it. Yeah. So there's something else you can look at, potentially looking at campsites or areas that are just a little closer to home or closer to in and around people, because most likely the hunters and people like that aren't going to be in those areas. So it's something to keep in mind, depending on what your familiarity is with hunting, how you feel about hunting, because, I mean, there are some people that are dead against it, and that's their opinion, and they have a right to that. I mean, I don't judge anybody for the way they feel. Just another thought.
Yeah, no, for sure. Anywhere that the hunters aren't, that you were comfortable. I mean, so you do have close to residential and parks. I mean, you always have Keji. You always have the provincial parks. I mean, it may not be what you're looking for, but nobody hunts legally inside a provincial park.
Wilderness areas, as we already said, like I said, if you could figure out when the seasons are and go in outside those seasons, technically you shouldn't have any problems there. I would still recommend displaying little orange, still putting your flagging tape up. These are just good practices when you're in the woods in general, because let's face it, folks, there's people out there that don't necessarily obey all the laws. We all know somebody. You know what I mean? To them, it's harmless. To us, not so harmless. It's just people's views. Yeah. Breaking a law is still breaking a law.
Yeah. And I mean, I've said this before. It's fine and dandy to be technically in the right, but if it puts your life at risk, I've used it for cyclists. Cyclist has a right of way on a road, and someone, a car comes up behind them. They have the right. They're there. But it doesn't matter one bit if they get hit by the truck. They're just as dead, right?
Yeah. There's no point being dead right.
Yeah. Right. You're out camping, and you camping too close to a hunter, and he doesn't know you're there, and you get shot. Then you're just as dead, whether you had every right to be there. So take those extra precautions. Be careful. Take common sense in. I highly encourage the parks, wilderness areas. Take a few minutes to just identify yourself in the area. It just takes a few pieces of flagging tape, hanging up a vest close to your sight in a nice visible location, just so people can see, because nobody wants to hurt you. So if they see you, they'll probably just move on or make some arrangements with you. It doesn't take much.
No, and it's a great time of year to crank out all that gear that's the funky colors. You know, maybe avoid the browns, the greens, the blacks, the dark colors that blend in with stuff. Perfect time of year to bring out that hot pink tarp with the neon green hammock, and you know what I mean? Stand out in the woods. I mean, people are going to see you. You know what I mean? That's the whole thing, is try to be seen. Something that we mentioned but we never really talked about, a good thing to know this time of year is, not only because of hunting, but because of the time of year it's coming up on, things are getting colder and stuff like that, bears are starting to go on to the last lag of their fuel up phase. You know what I mean? Because from the time a bear comes out of hibernation until it basically goes into hibernation, it's got one thing in mind: get as many calories as it can as easily as possible, or consume as many calories with as few calories put out as possible, because they're preparing for another hibernation. So they're starting to come into that time of year where they're trying to get the last little bit of calories they can jam into them and stuff like that. Something to be very aware of as a bushcrafter, a camper, or hiker, any of that going out there around there now. If they have a good sniff of something that seems like an easy meal, you might get somebody that's curious nosing around. The other side of this is there's a lot of bear bait sites out. Because bear hunting, bear snaring, stuff like that, that's all, I think we're already into that season. It started a little while ago, but if you're walking through the woods and you happen to see, you know, like a pile of donuts, that's not somebody dumping stuff, that's somebody trying to bait something. Yeah. Which, if you agree with the methods or not, the fact is it's still there, it's still legal, and it could potentially mean something for you to be aware of. Because if they're baiting in that area, there's a reason they're baiting in that area. People generally don't bait in areas where there are no animals to bait.
No. Yeah, and give that a healthy space. Not just because potentially someone's there hunting, but because they are dragging a bear in. It's used to eating. So if you're disturbing that bear, you could become, you know, you could have a less than desirable encounter there. And I think you mentioned trapping earlier. I have been told that trappers are supposed to identify at least both ends of their trap line.
Yes, and each trap's supposed to have their number stamped on it.
Yeah. So if you're walking along a trail and you see one of those markings, and I'm not exactly sure what it looks, how it always looks. I assume it's some kind of tape.
Usually it's a steel tag stuck on with a name and their number.
Yeah, and the beginning of the line?
Yeah.
Yeah. It should be somewhat visible. If you see that, you know, just try to avoid going down that, because they're telling you as clearly as they can that there are traps set, and the last thing you want to do is get entangled with one of those. It could be painful and dangerous. And if you have pets, here's another thing to keep in mind. If you have pets, keep them on a leash, especially this time of year.
Yeah.
It doesn't take long for them to end up, you know, getting entangled with something that you don't want them to, unless you really trust that your pet's going to stay basically by your side the whole time you're out there. You make sure they're properly leashed or tied while you're out there, because nobody wants to see their pet get hurt.
And while we are talking about trapping, if you see somebody walking around on a Sunday that's not hunting Sundays, like the two first seasons of deer season, or the first 2 Sundays of deer season, trappers are allowed to carry a rimfire rifle for the use of dispatching trapped animals, even on Sundays. So that's not a red flag moment of somebody out there poaching. They're potentially running a trap line. And once again, regardless if you agree or disagree with trapping, realize that some people make a good chunk of their money by doing this. So to them, you are interfering with their livelihood. Beaver pelts, martins, bobcat, lynx, stuff like that. There's numbers on what you're allowed to claim of each, but I mean, some of those go for good money. And like I said, people make some of their livelihood off this, so take that in consideration while you're out there too.
Yeah, and the ability to dispatch them humanely is, that's why they carry that particular weapon tool, and that's the reason for it. So they're trying to make sure the animal doesn't suffer. It's the best intention that it could be. And in my experience, they've been pretty reasonable with it. Like, I haven't seen anyone being foolish or silly with it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, most trapping is not an easy thing. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of money to get into trapping. So most trappers, and once again, not all, because there's always exceptions, but most trappers, they're pretty good about it. They put a lot of time, effort, money into it. They don't want to screw themselves over. So,
So those are highlights we wanted to get into. They said it's a beautiful time of year. It definitely try to get out there. Just pick and choose your location and your time. Um, you know, I loved your idea of the bright pink tarps. I don't have a bright pink tarp. I kind of wish I do now. But I do have the candy apple green one from Mech, and that's always a fun one to set up.
and honestly, this time of year, if I'm out in the woods, flag and tape, like you said, I'm gonna admit I'm guilty for not writing my name and stuff on it, but I definitely put a bunch of it up around my campsite. That way, you can see it from a distance, and it's not just one piece. Like, oh, maybe that's just a blaze line. No, like mine looks like streamers going off around my campsite. That way, when you walk by, you're like, okay, what's that? And then they might investigate, but generally, once they get close enough to see a campfire and a setup spot, most people go, okay, there's somebody camping there, and off they go. And I think maybe 3 times in my life I've been camping this time of year, and somebody just wandered in and was like, oh, just kind of wanted to see what was going on. And generally, that's the end of it. I ask them if they want a cup of coffee, and we go our ways.
Yeah, I did get out last weekend. I didn't see anyone. My buddy Chris did though, and he said they kind of intentionally stopped, had a conversation, just wondering what we were at, where we were to, and I think it was just for his own comfort as well as ours, make sure that they knew what was on the go. And he kind of confirmed to us that the area we were camping was generally more or less people camped there, and the hunting was over in another area of that area, so that we should have been pretty well safe for what we were doing.
Yep, and that's all you really need to do. Most people are curious, they don't want to have conflict, and they want to make sure everybody goes home. You know what I mean? Hunters want to go home, they want to make sure campers go home. Nobody intentionally wants to hurt you or fight with you, generally. Once again, exceptions to every rule, but it's very, very rare.
Oh man, I've generally, and I mean I hunted in Cape Breton, I've hunted around. I have rarely met anyone that was combative or argumentative even. Most of them have been pretty good to get along with. And I mean, you're hunting in the same area, you'd almost think that there might be some. But I've even had hunters say, I've seen a lot of sign over here. We've seen some animals that area. Like, they've been pretty good to share information that you might think they wouldn't. So people are generally pretty friendly. See another outdoors person, they're kind of interested. And oftentimes they're interested in what you know and what they can teach you. So it's actually been a good experience for me. And I expect most people, I hope, do find it. But you do, the odd person, I guess, they consider it their area. They've been hunting there for years. Why are you doing? It's not the norm, but it is a possibility.
And such is life, right? But as representatives of the bushcrafting community, try and, have a little dignity with yourself, turn the other cheek, and move on with your day.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think we need to do too much more with this topic tonight, unless you had more you want to cover there, Ben. It's one of our shorter episodes. We're still at 50 minutes, though. So it's not terribly short, but... Anything else to end on, Ben?
No, I'm good. I think we can end it with that. I'm just thinking of the next show because I have some ideas that I want to talk about.
All right. Fair enough. Well, everybody out there, have fun. I know this wasn't our normal topic for the night or for our shows, but I think it's definitely worth just mentioning, get it rolling around in people's heads so that, especially the non-hunters out there, just to be aware it is going on and take a little precautions, get out there, be safe, have fun, get dirty.
Night all.
Night, everybody. Night, Scott, Steve. I'd rather be outside, all you guys. See yous.